Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
We have two guests today on the Cognitive Crucible. Major Vince Michel, who is a U.S. Army military intelligence officer turned into an information operations officer, which is a FA-30 designator, and also U.S. Army Major Josh Keller, who is a field artillery officer recently turned into a space operations officer, and that Army designator is FA-40. So Vince and Josh, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you for having us, sir.
Thank you, sir. This is a great opportunity.
All right, and briefly to our audience, I would just like to make a note that both Major Michel's and Major Keller's opinions are their own and do not represent the policies of the Army or the Department of Defense. So the conversation I'd like to have with you two fellows today will cover your research and experience at the Army Command and General Staff College. And I will try to refer to this in the future as CJCSI, Command and General Staff College. And both of you guys are just now completing the Information Advantage Scholar Program. And Vince, your thesis coming out of this, and we're going to get into this, but your thesis is entitled "The Other Side to the Story: Consolidation of Gains and the Narrative Space." And Josh, your thesis is "Adapting Targeting Policy for Non-Lethal Effects on Satellite Communication Architecture." All right, two very different topics, but both obviously really important to today's competition that we find ourselves in. So we're looking forward to diving into that with both of you guys. But before we get into these topics, could we start from both of you to get your hot take on our strategic landscape, or if you like, the times in which we live? And before you begin, could you just tell our audience which one of you is talking so that we can map a voice to the person?
Sir, it's Major Michel. I'll start off first. I would just say we're entering that period where we're really seeing that folks are trying to figure out if they have to lead with information versus physical effects, and kind of understanding just how much information is at play at shaping how we perceive the world, how everything's being perceived on just across a global audience, and really seeing that we've kind of moved away from just simple things of larger assets being put into a specific area to create a message. There's a lot more building blocks that have to kind of go to actually ensure that you're being able to generate effects across a larger audience to truly achieve what you're looking to get after.
I see.
Well,
awesome.
Hey, sir, Josh Keller here. So I'll speak in regards to the space domain for the strategic landscape. For me, having the recently published Army Space Vision, it helps to outline the Army's role in space operations, and it provides everybody from commander down to individual warfighter what we need to do and how to define the Army's role in space operations, integrating friendly, joint, the coalition, and even commercial space capabilities to help interdict adversary space capabilities and ultimately protect the individual warfighter on the ground. So that's been a great development recently, having that clearly defined Army Space Vision.
Cool. Yeah. Hey, Josh, you said that this is a relatively newly published document by the Army. Do you think we could get a link for that and put it into the show notes?
Yes, absolutely, sir. I'll make sure and get that to you. And the title of it is "The Army Space Vision Supporting Multi-Domain Operations," to be exact. But I will provide that link. Yes, sir.
All right, awesome. I'm sure that there's some folks in the audience that would like to check that out. Okay, so moving along. So we've introduced you, but I think our audience would appreciate just getting a little bit more background on each of you guys. What has been your journey so far with the Army? And both of you presumably have been in the Army for about 10 years or so. Would that be fair?
Yes, sir. I hit my 11th in a few days. So,
Okay.
but I've taken it's Vince, by the way, for everyone. took a interesting journey. So I came from New Mexico. So I went through ROTC there at the University of New Mexico. Kind of one of the few to actually go off into active duty. Commissioned as an armor officer. Had my first assignment at Fort Cavazos. Did my lieutenant time there, and then transitioned to be an intelligence officer. But specialized in SIGINT, so really started really understanding signals and taking a look at that, and even aspects of EW when the Army was trying to figure out who's actually kind of leading that. So then I did all my intel time over at the 101st and 3rd Brigade, the good old Roxxons. So really kind of understood tactical intelligence, but even just larger planning in general, since there's always we're always planning for air assaults and really using lift assets. And then jumped in the world of recruiting command to kind of really understand just that landscape in itself is a pretty interesting dynamic of just getting out there, figuring out how to propense a population to really get the message out, because a lot of folks just don't realize what they don't know. So really just being able to educate was kind of pretty humbling, just be able to interact with everyday people. And then now transitioned over to the information operations, did some time with the Futures Command, really looking at how does the Army use information in 2030 and 2040, and kind of was involved in a lot of those discussions and really helping to shape that. And then soon I'll be headed over to Fort Eisenhower to work with a specialized EW unit to help be a planner over there.
Yeah,
Hey
awesome
everyone,
stuff.
Josh here. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
good stuff. Yeah, Josh, please.
Yep. So I graduated grad school in 2012 from the University of Iowa, and I had this feeling in my stomach. I had two grandfathers that both served in World War II, an uncle that served in Vietnam, and I had this gut visceral feeling to get a call for service, if you will. So I joined the Army through OCS, and I commissioned August 8th, 2013. I then went to the Field Artillery Basic Officer Leader course, went to career after that for fire direction, and then maintained, the regular pathway and key goalposts at each echelon of lieutenant, captain for your progressive jobs. I finished battery command at the 212 FA Charlie Battery at Fort Carson, and luckily 1st Space Brigade was right across the street from my battery, so I decided to do some broadening over there while I put in my voluntary transfer incentive program application to become a space operations officer. While I was doing broadening there, I was approved, and then I went down to do some time on a space control planning team. And then after that time, came here to the Command and General Staff College.
That's cool. So I would suspect that the Cognitive Crucible audience in general tends to be more familiar with FA30s and what the FA30 designator is all about, but probably less so with FA40, the Army space officer. Do you think, Josh, you could give maybe a quick download as to what it means to be an FA40, what the purpose is, things like that?
Absolutely. So for us, FA40s, we utilize space capabilities with terrestrial, air, sea, and high altitude based systems, usually owned and operated through the Department of Defense, the DoD, and the IC, the intelligence community. We also we partner with commercial partners, and then try to provide essentially everything we can to the warfighter to increase their likelihood of success. That's kind of that in a nutshell. We do have our codified joint space capabilities for space situational awareness, space control, which is actually an antiquated term, but it's still used by the Army. Satellite communications, environmental monitoring, missile warning. Those are our main bread and butter missions that we kind of hold on to for the Army.
Cool. Yeah. No, that sounds like a really interesting place to be in with respect to not just the Army, but the overall competition space that we find ourselves in right now. So, yeah, but
Yes, sir.
both of you guys are, have some really interesting activities coming up, I would say. All right, so let's get into the research that you guys conducted at CGSC. Well, also, first of all, another quick little background. How long is CGSC, and what is the Information Advantage Scholar Program? I'll let either one of you take that.
Great, sir. It's Vincent. So really what CJCSI is, it's kind of compartmentalized in two different, you could say like modules. You kind of have your Common Core, which we all went through before we could even apply for this program. And that runs across all the student population that's selected for resident. And that starts about the beginning of August and goes all the way through November. And then at that November time is when we were selected for the Information Advantage Scholars Program. And transitioned to a whole new staff group where we kind of met folks that were also across the population that also applied. And then from November all the way until June is when we're doing the entire scholars program. But for the other folks that are kind of here during resident, during that same time, they have a block of planning called Advanced Operating Course, or AOC. And then they follow on into electives where they can get from a range of topics from history, leadership, to even space cadre, cyber operations courses. So there's a pretty good selection of things that people can also do to broaden for those last few months.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great rundown, Vince.
And then for the program itself, for the IA scholars, so it offers a select group of professional military education students a range of accelerated, rigorous graduate level studies to promote understanding of integrating information technology and compelling narratives within the joint force to achieve operational success.
Yeah, Vince has the banner down perfect. He is a true F830, and I definitely applaud him as a tenured professional already.
All right, dynamite. Okay, well, let's get into your studies. So I guess I'd like to give each of you the floor, if you will. Take a few minutes to describe, what each of you did. Why did you choose to study what you did? What were some of your key findings? Why does it matter? What are some of the recommendations that you have for your colleagues and leaders and policymakers? So it seems like we've been going, Vince, Josh. So, Vince, perhaps you could start first and describe your research, please.
Sweet, Cheryl. So kind of really what really started it was, so I did look at the consolidation of gains in the narrative space. But before I even started figuring out what those two words really were, kind of the relationship between them, it was all led on this really exploration of cognition, of how we perceive the world and perception, kind of related to that one article I wrote for y'all. Really, there's still this aspect of how we're perceiving things in a conflict can kind of really influence things. And that kind of sent me down this spiral of the lit review, of really seeing that there's different definitions for narrative, just the impacts in itself. And one thing that really stuck out was that a smaller force can fix a larger force in the information environment, just simply based on how well they can gain an advantage in that space. And from there, that's where it kind of led me down to this research about the narrative space, which is that the interconnectedness of the stories on the ground of how we perceive things, just the simple information flow from people to people, but then just how that articulates through all the different dimensions and domains of just those effects for just our ability to then consolidate gains of anything that we've done in either of those spaces and move it from the tactical to the strategic level. So to really explore that concept, I took a deep dive into World War II, and especially specifically the Pacific Theater of Operations, and kind of looked at those common themes of what were those cultural aspects. How did the factors of isolation play in, of being able to control that narrative space to influence either the US forces or the Japanese forces' ability to influence the narrative space, but then also how do you then take those factors to then truly consolidate gains at those locations. And did a few case studies, took a look at Tarawa, just because that one was just catastrophic success of a true force on force, but also looked at Guam because it had a population that supported American ideals and to this day still do. And just that aspect of just having those consolidation of gain activities done early really paid dividends for why we continue to see the success and partnership that we have to this day. But then also just did Okinawa, as it offered another unique population set of seeing how people perceive the world, and just in itself those inabilities to overcome those social cultural factors really prevented the full consolidation of gains from the U.S. perspective. It's kind of one of the key findings that came out of looking at that. But overall, just kind of looking across all those different things, and really, yes, the Pacific Theater of Operations was way back then, but what it really allowed me to do was kind of truly understand how isolation in itself plays an important factor to create effects on the physical landscape, but then just also narratively to really change the perceptions and influence how people are perceiving a conflict, to then translate that up to the next level of how are you then taking those gains to the operational, to the strategic level.
Yeah, I was unaware of this until very recently, but apparently rugby is huge in the South Pacific, and I don't quite know the full origin story as to why that is, but I don't think rugby was originally conceived and played in the South Pacific. I think that there's a relationship with World War II and operations in the Pacific as to why rugby is so popular nowadays in the South Pacific. But I'm curious, Vince, if that entered into any of your studies and reading and research, especially as you were talking about gains that were made and consolidating gains. So is any of this like resonating with you at all?
Yes, sir. So like really looking at that same aspect. So one of the quotes that really stuck out through this time and kind of starting the journey was with T. Lawrence, when he said, we had won a province when we had taught us the civilians in it to die for our ideal of freedom. The presence or absence of the enemy was a secondary matter. And just that understanding of, it still goes back to those cultural symbols and how they travel between a population and whether it's embraced or not, and really how does that then change that social identity. So when we see things like rugby and just these things that are passed from culture to culture, you can really see that those are those positive areas within the narrative space, that there's that common ground and bond that kind of can create an influence later on that we may need.
I see. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. What so coming out of your research events, what are some of the recommendations that you have for leaders, policymakers, or anyone who is just interested in these kinds of topics?
So for the first recommendation, I think it's really just that we just have to truly understand that there's both a physical aspect. And then when we say that it's still a battle of wills with conflict, we have to truly embrace that it is a battle of wills, and that there's this aspect of cognition that has to be accounted for, because the second and third order effects, although we may not see it immediately, truly pay either dividends or prevent us from operational success down the road as we start to consolidate gains, and kind of really seeing that interplay really has to be accounted for early and planned for continuously. Otherwise, we kind of lose the advantage within any operation, and we just may not know it until the end. But then even like moving forward, just continuing to really see how does information travel, and just understanding those aspects can also lean some findings from here of just kind of seeing, hey, how are people still perceiving things? Because although we may send a message out, we don't actually know how it is on the back end of how they're understanding that message, and just being able to create an assessment that even understands that can kind of help change how we actually view the narrative space and its impacts on operations.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Well, Josh, let's turn to you and ask you to provide the same kind of overview of your thesis. And just as a reminder, your title is Adapting Targeting Policy for Non-Lethal Effects on Satellite Communication Architecture. Over to you, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do a quick breakdown for why I chose this topic. I had, as a young captain, I was deployed to Afghanistan, and I was into a joint air-ground integration cell from 4th Infantry Division. And when I got over to Afghanistan, we started doing, quote unquote, kinetic targeting in theater. And we had to do some pre-qualification courses for the, collateral damage estimation. We had to become qualified as a CDE analyst in order to conduct kinetic strikes. So what I did was I took that knowledge and that experience, and I started looking at non-lethal effects, with the electromagnetic spectrum. What are the differences between that? And I came with the question of, what CDE principles can I try to codify and adapt to address the differences between conventional lethal effects and non-lethal effects? And I chose one of the mission areas for the space domain of satellite communication, so SATCOM. I chose that architecture. I'm like, how can I provide that for a baseline of satellite communication architecture? So I broke it down as, SATCOM itself has 3 links, right? So it's got the ground, which is it's primarily based in the land domain. Of course, it is based in the land domain. It has the orbital segment, which is in the space. That's your actual equipment orbiting the Earth, providing satellite communication down to the users ultimately. And then what links that is exactly that, the link segment, which is the components of data and radio waves being transmitted from Earth up to the orbit and back down. So what I tried to do was break down 2 very large policy documents. We have the Collateral Damage Estimation Methodology, which is harbored inside of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Instruction 3160.01 series. And then we have Target Development Standards, which is housed inside the CJCSI 3370.01 series. So what I try to figure out as a logical flow is, how can target development standards accommodate satellite communication architecture on orbit? What are the differences between having a land-based geophysical target versus a actual orbiting piece of equipment that's going around with its orbital mechanics around the Earth? And then what are the resulting impacts to the intelligence and targeting professionals? So what I tried to do was I broke down those, I started with basic lexicon, right? So we often conflate lethal with kinetic. And what I did was I broke down that kinetic and non-kinetic are essentially effect delivery mechanisms, which provide resulting effects of lethal and non-lethal. Now, if you look at CDE, what that really primarily is meant for is providing a kinetic effect delivery mechanism that provides resulting effects of lethal means against human beings, or providing physically destructive actions against a facility or some sort of physical structure. So I moved through some literature review, talked through essentially that's kind of delineation.
Josh, do you think I could just ask, so you've mentioned, is it CBE Bravo or CDE Delta?
That is Charlie Delta Echo.
That's and that's what, and
that's
what is that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's collateral damage estimation.
Okay. All right. Got it. Oh, okay. And you said that you first started thinking about this when you were deployed to Afghanistan. What time frame was that?
That was from the early winter of 2018 until August of 2019 when I came back.
Okay. And I mean, this is more level setting for me than for the audience, but you described a high level outline of satellite communications architecture, which includes a ground component, the actual on orbit infrastructure hardware component, but then also the actual transmission of information to and from those 2 components. And all of that together can be considered the architecture that you are interested in studying policy, et cetera, on. Is that a fair characterization?
That is a very fair characterization,
Okay.
sir. Yes.
Okay.
Satellite communication. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep,
All right.
absolutely.
Excellent. Okay. Please.
Yeah. I
please
apologize if that wasn't clear. I just kind of dove right in, and I have a soundtrack in my mind of what, so please.
No,
by
no,
any means, if there's
it was clear. Like I said, it was probably more for me than for those following along at home. So yeah, please proceed.
Okay. Yep. So satellite communication architecture. What I did was I kind of broke it down into, targeting taxonomy using the target development standards. I looked at it through a lethal and then, non-lethal lens of what that process looks like. And then I built out a actual hypothetical collateral damage estimation framework directly from that CDE framework that could be used as a framework for, future development. It was essentially adapting it to understand the processes. There's 5 levels of collateral damage estimation. And I won't go too far in the details of that, but we'll just say wave tops, 5 levels. Each one of them has their specific focus, the aspects of them, and then the methodology for that level. So I just built out a parallel to providing non-lethal effects against satellite communication, what that would look like on a typical 5-level collateral damage estimation framework. And what I did was just paralleled over those aspects, the focus and the methodology at each level, and applied it to the satellite communication architecture. And I provided that as the research findings of, hey, what we need to do is we have some very unique challenges with the space domain. But what underscores that is using the precise lexicon. Not everything is kinetic and not everything is non-kinetic. We need to really hammer home the importance of using effects-based language when we're talking about what the commander wants completed for his or her objectives, and then how we're going to go about doing that with matching capabilities. Then also the importance of developing non-lethal methodologies. I looked at the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff's instructions library, all the directives. There's very few titles or even subject matters that get after non-lethal methodologies that are as in-depth as the CDE methodology. So those are some of the main conclusions that I had is what can that feed by standardizing that lexicon, by developing that methodology and adapting it. One of the biggest things I came away with was, it might not be that simple. People say it's just not that simple. Well, it's not, but it is that straightforward of just developing a baseline framework, modifying that, and then making it work for fostering collaboration and just improving the processes we already have in place.
Mm-hmm. Wow, yeah, that's awesome. I do like your insistence on, thinking about the word lethal and decoupling lethal from having to be kinetic. Doesn't necessarily follow, especially when you're talking about, a communication framework. A lethal act on a communication system, doesn't necessarily mean that it's kinetic, nor does it mean that people die, at least immediately. So I do very much like that. Not too long ago, maybe even as little as 10 years ago, these kinds of systems that you're studying, Josh, were, I don't know, relatively untouchable by
Yes.
a large portion of our adversary network, right? Because the open source and cheaply available technology, which is available now, just wasn't as distributed and available to the world as it is now. But boy, we are in a completely different moment than we were 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, where every component of what you were just describing, the ground component, the transmission component, and the actual hardware on orbit component, all of those components are at risk now. And boy, is it a wicked problem. What's your reaction to all of that?
No, I think you encapsulated that perfectly. It is a wicked problem. There is no one solution. We have an adversary, our main adversary is launching on a typical day, they could launch upwards of 10, 20, 30, 40 satellites that are going to match commercial launches that we have here. So what are we trying to do now? We have to solve the simple problems that we can solve while still thinking about the strategic lens that we have to ultimately get after for our visions of our operating concepts that are far in the future. We need to understand where we need to be, how to protect ourselves now, and then what are we doing today to get after the problems for tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is great stuff, Josh, for both of you, actually. So I guess I'd like to ask. So a few months ago, we had Colonel John Agnello on the podcast, and Colonel Agnello is leading the Army's Information Advantage Program office. And he came on the podcast and talked about information advantage. And subsequent to that, the Army published, I think back in the December time period, December 2023, its doctrine publication 3-13 on information advantage. So I guess I'd like to ask each of you to describe how your research, maps up into the Army's information advantage doctrine.
Started off, yeah, it's Vince. So for mine, it really starts to leading with that idea of how are we leading an operation with information and understanding that it's more than what we think. We use terms like data. Everyone kind of assumes it's things on the computer, but even just simple messages passed from a person to a person in a face-to-face interaction is also data. So really understanding how information travels, how it's being perceived, how you can control that environment and create certain advantages is what allows an operation to be successful. So once again, going back to that idea of the narrative space, when you're really understanding that all these things are interconnected, which kind of also ties in with the Army's operating concept of MDO, and understanding how each of the domains can create an effect in the other. That's really where my research I feel like it kind of ties into it, because when you create a space in an advantage in the narrative space, then you create the ability for opportunities that can either propel an operation forward or just even preserve what you have already accomplished. So just understanding that there's more than just the physical maneuver that's taking place on the ground, which a lot we're pretty comfortable talking about of shoot, move, and communicate. But that key word there is communicate, and just even understanding how if you don't have the ability to influence the narrative space and control how information is being passed to pass from one unit to another, you're not going to be able to communicate. So just even understanding that aspect continues to draw in how we have to start looking at things for more than just a physical presence and just physical maneuver, and ask ourselves, how are we maneuvering in the narrative space to drive operations?
Cool. What about you, Josh?
Well, so the information doctrine itself is a great starting point for the research, because what I was trying to do as an ultimate goal, which for me is an essential part of improving the profession, right, and being a steward of the profession, is the baseline of just having clear language when it comes to information. So we have to be able to codify the approach that we have for using information and data, right? And Vince talked about that, where it crosses domains, it crosses dimensions. But for mine, for targeting policy with the lethal and non-lethal effects, we have to be able to have non-ambiguous language to convey information to our commanders and what we're trying to get after. And I think for mine, essentially building and adapting a framework that can be applied to non-lethal effect producing mechanisms that occur in the physical dimension, that's going to provide a starting point to where we can start doing those simple tasks to solve those wicked problems we spoke of prior when it comes to the space domain. And just essentially just having a stepping off point for providing information, how to clearly articulate that with definitive and clear language, so that our commanders can actually understand the effects of what we're trying to put in the battle space and make decisions in a timely fashion.
Yeah, cool. Cool stuff. So coming up here relatively soon, I think on May the 22nd, CGSC is having an information advantage symposium. Could one or both of you tell our audience a little bit more about this and where they can find some more information as well?
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and defer to Vince because he's been the primary planner for this entire symposium.
Hey, sir. So on the 22nd of May, we're kind of holding the Information Advantage Symposium. And really what we were looking to do is it's an interactive panel to where it's going to be a mix of the scholars itself. There's 12 others, to include myself, there are in this program. And it's really this ability to share what we've researched, but then also with our guest panelists, tie in some of their expertise and really drive the conversation. So the things we're kind of looking at, how are we leveraging emerging concepts and technology to gain an information advantage? Why narrative matters? You can probably guess I'm on that panel.
Yep.
And then also just looking at tactical optimization and military operations. So we've had folks looking at how we're using AI to get after acquisitions faster. How is the military decision-making process versus the rapid decision-making process create more of an effective staff to operate? So being able to share that, but then also tie in with our guests. And then for one of them, our keynote speaker, Mr. Ray Powell, is also, he's going to be talking about winning in the gray zone through assertive transparency. So once again, already driving that conversation of that there's these different aspects of the information environment that we have to account for and understand how that influences the holistic picture of an area that we often don't want to think about. Because we usually are confined to our smaller spots, but now with the ubiquitous coverage of just technology, we are more interconnected than ever to kind of cross those multiple different types of zones and create different effects. But then also inviting some panelists that are, we have Mr. Kendall Haven, who's our master storyteller, and then our person from the TRADOC G2, really going back again of just what are those aspects of the narrative that really makes things resonate in the information environment, but also just how are people seeing the story on the ground? Because we may think this is how they're actually perceiving it, but being able to do that analysis to actually understand this is what's actually being heard and told on the ground to really give a baseline for commanders to understand, is their message getting across to the intended audience? And then, like I said, really, once again, looking at how, for that third panel, how people are leading with data and fighting with data as a ability to continue to optimize military operations.
Cool. And so this is, like you said, May the 22nd, which is Wednesday the 22nd at Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Is it open to the public? Will there be the option for any kind of remote attendance? Could you give a quick hit on that?
Yes, sir. We are looking to have a remote attendance. So we're going to have a registration link for it. The CJCSI Foundation is kind of helping us spearhead the ability to kind of have a registration site. But from there, once we get everyone's information, we'll be able to, if they're not able to attend in person, then we'll provide that virtual link. That way we can ensure a wide audience and really capture information professionals, especially those that want to kind of interact with the panelists or even the scholars themselves, since we're having a broad range of topics and the guests that we have coming.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And there will be a link in the show notes for those in our audience who would like to check this out more. Okay, awesome, guys. Well, so we'll start wrapping up here. Do either of you have a research suggestion which perhaps relates to what you've already been studying and some additional research that needs to be done in these areas?
Sure. So Vince again. So for me, it's really, I've kind of, at least with the research I have now, I kind of have that foundation of, hey, the narrative space and consolidation of gains is a relationship, but it kind of needs to go the next step further of really being able to use some sort of statistical analysis to understand what are the actual factors that influence it. But then even just this idea and concept of maneuvering in the narrative space to create effects for a commander is another area that kind of has to be looked at. Same thing could be done through a statistical lens of, hey, if I do this X, Y, and Z, it'll create this relative advantage for X amount of time. Just even answering that can probably help drive a lot of further discussions that we kind of continue to question of, hey, what do we actually need to achieve an advantage in the information space?
Okay, yeah, no, good one for sure. What about you, Josh?
Well, for me, from looking at my research and the topics covered, I think there's a huge need for understanding the integration of cyber operations into the space domain. Looking at that Venn diagram of what feeds what helps what are the interlinked relationships? Does it look like a pair of binoculars as a Venn diagram, or is it more of a monocle? Where's the crossover? How to clearly delineate is the space domain a delivery mechanism for cyber operations? Is the cyber domain a delivery mechanism for the space domain? I think there's a lot of research potential there for future efforts.
Okay, nice, both of you. Okay, a book or online resource that could either be related to the kinds of things that you've been studying, or it could just be, what is on Vince and Josh's nightstand these days that you could recommend to our audience.
Sir, what's sitting on the nightstand? I've already read it because I kind of had to for the thesis, but I stumbled across it before I even started writing. But it's called Dangerous Narratives, Warfare Strategy and Stagecraft. It has that initial concept of what the narrative space is, but it really highlights a bunch of other research of really showing how narratives can be both strategic and tactical, and have these rippling effects that we often don't realize can just come from the ability to align our words, deeds, and images. Another interesting one that kind of gets people just thinking, kind of had that discussion earlier about rugby and seeing how those cultural aspects move across, but is the geography of thought, how Asians and Westerners think differently and why. And it really just goes across a study of the globe of just understanding how culture traveled over time, and really just seeing that the way we view the world has been influenced just by simply how culture has traveled. So it's kind of interesting just to see that from a information perspective, just how people in itself perceive the world just changes over time, especially if we continue to interact with diverse populations.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
For myself, sir, so mine is going to be the Battle Beyond. That's called Fighting and Winning the Coming War in Space. And it's actually written by Mr. Paul Szymanski, and then one of our professors here, Lieutenant Colonel Jerry Drew. It touches a great aspect of kind of like I've talked about, expanding upon existing lexicon of war, talking about what is going to encompass the actual, future war that is coming in space, how to get after that, and then essentially, providing symbology, illustrations, historical examples, and just providing a great background context to the United States and its future for space warfare.
Yeah, cool. And coincidentally, I've actually had some interactions with Paul Szymanski. It's been a while since I've chatted with him. I'll need to circle back with him and see if maybe he'd like to discuss his research and his thought leadership related to space warfare. I think is his major focus, and has been for quite a long time. Well, that's awesome, you guys. I should have asked this earlier, but what's next for both of you, and what are you looking forward to about your next assignment?
So in normal fashion, I'll start off again. People can probably guess who I am.
Vince, yes.
But so I'm headed off to Georgia, good old Braves country. But I'm headed over there to be a team leader, like I said, in the 11th Cyber Battalion. They're a unique electronic warfare unit, really trying to figure out how to deliver EW effects at that core and division echelon, but really shaping to then have strategic effects. So a lot of that, luckily from that SIGINT background, be able to hit the ground running, but then at the same time, looking to really dive into the world of cyber and how do I leverage those units across the way to really build out those information operations and kind of plan a different echelon. So hopefully it should be quite a diverse journey out there. Mainly just excited to kind of be out in that area.
So then for myself, so I'll be actually heading over to Fort Liberty North Carolina, and I'll be working in the G9 Information Warfare Directorate of the 1st Special Forces Command. Super grateful for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to starting to contribute towards their education pipeline that they have now for like a 3 Yankee space identifier course they're going to be offering to their warfighters in that organization. And then also helping develop what we call the space, soft space, cyberspace triad, which is an ongoing effort headed by 1st Special Forces Command, Space and Missile Defense Command, and Cyber Command. So we're trying to get that effort pushed forward to develop concepts, how to deliver capabilities, and really refine what we're going to be doing where the intersection of those 3 entities collide.
Awesome stuff, you guys. It sounds like you have some really interesting projects ahead of you, which I'm sure will be both personally and professionally rewarding. And also, before we close, I just want to also give a big thanks and shout out to one of your colleagues, Major K. Magdalena, and she really did a lot of the heavy lifting on the front end to get this queued up for this episode. So to Kay, a big thank you, and a big thank you to both of you guys as well for what you're doing and what you will continue to be doing in support of the Western Enlightenment experiment. So Godspeed to both of you on that. And with that, Major Vince Michel and Major Josh Keller, thank you both for being guests on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you, sir.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.